Hi everyone, we are back today with our special guest Gil Carrillo, retired homicide investigator with the LA County Sheriff. We are going to pick up our conversation about the Idaho student murders and the recent arrest of the suspect Bryan Kohberger. Gil, it is great to have you back with us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So I just wanted to jump in and ask you, I think there's some relevance here with the Night Stalker case of which you were a big part. In this case, it appears that a lot of the investigative work centered around identifying this vehicle, this white Hyundai Elantra that had been spotted on surveillance footage, and ultimately is what led investigators to finding Bryan Kohberger and tracking the car down to his parents' home in Pennsylvania. Talk to me for a minute about the role that the Toyota Corolla played in the Night Stalker case after it had been spotted in Mission Viejo, and how that effort led to the ultimate capture of Richard Ramirez.
Well, the vehicle itself led to his arrest only because it was recovered. We had a partial license plate number on it. We found the vehicle in the city of Los Angeles, and we had somebody that had the vehicle stolen. The reporting party had it stolen out of what is referred to as Chinatown, and that wasn't really that far away from where the vehicle was recovered. Upon its recovery, that particular vehicle was used down in Orange County, so Orange County took control of the vehicle, and they ultimately recovered a thumbprint that was left inside the vehicle, which led to the positive identification of Richard Ramirez.
And there was a all points bulletin issued, right, out to the press and law enforcement around the Southern California area for that particular vehicle. If I recall, there was a public effort to try to locate that vehicle.
Yes.
Why was that something that was made public when you consider that, obviously the suspect would have known that vehicle was being looked for as well?
We're saying we made it public. We didn't make it public. We went out to all law enforcement, but we did not make it public because we did not want the suspect to know that we knew what vehicle he had been driving or that we were looking for it.
So what was your reaction when that information actually did become public? Because I remember it being written about in the newspapers.
Well, it became public once we took it into custody. There was some question whether we wanted to sit on the vehicle, stake it out, and wait for the suspect to come back to it if he wanted to, or do we just pick it up and have it processed right away? And the decision was made for it to be picked up and processed. Once it was picked up, then the information on the license plate was released.
And that led to ultimately the discovery of it in the Chinatown neighborhood. And
it was found in the Rampart district, which is not distance-wise that far from Chinatown. Only cops had the information on the vehicle. The public did not. Once we've located the vehicle, then the decision was made. The question came up, should we sit on it, stake it out, and see if the suspect will come back to it, or do we just impound it and process immediately? And the decision was made to impound and process. Once it was impounded and processed, then it went public that the vehicle was discovered. And that vehicle was one that was used down in Mission Viejo, which is Orange County, California.
Yeah, and that wasn't the first vehicle that you had your eyes on in the Night Stalker case. If I recall from the documentary, there was a vehicle that he had been stopped in that you had intended to process but had been left out in the warm weather. So by the time you got a chance to do it, correct?
That vehicle was impounded. That was a stolen vehicle that he was using that night. It was impounded, and he used other vehicles that were all stolen.
But you never had a chance to process that initial one.
Oh, that vehicle, when we went out there to look at it, everything had been baked off because it was out in the sun. There was nothing left. That was in LAPD's custody, and it was up to them to process it.
Now, in this case in Moscow, Idaho, law enforcement had no qualms about going public with the information about this suspicious vehicle. Why do you suspect that they were so willing to put that information out to the public, which would tip the suspect, of course, that they're onto him?
I have no idea, since only they have the knowledge what they were doing at that time, and I wouldn't try to speculate inside their minds or what they're doing. But what you do have to worry about, you have a decision to make. Since I don't know how much information they had, And if they knew that they were looking for a white car and didn't put it out, and he in fact hit again, well, then you're putting the public at risk. So they had a vehicle description. We did not have a license plate on our vehicle. We had a vehicle description, which the vehicle description was put out, but not the plate number.
Yeah, in this case, they didn't have the plate number either. They just knew they were looking for a white Hyundai Elantra, and they asked the public to come forward. I think they got many thousands of tips. And ultimately, it's quite interesting how they uncovered the vehicle, because they had apparently a patrol officer or an officer with Washington State University Police, which was in Pullman, Washington, 10 miles to the west of Moscow, conducted a search in the database and found a white Hyundai Elantra that had been registered to this particular individual. And then they staked the car out. They got the plate. They pulled up his license. But it's interesting to think about that the whole time. And again, this suspect is obviously innocent until proven guilty or suspected to be innocent. It was just sitting right there. And so you wonder what was going through his mind in terms of knowing that he's driving a vehicle that law enforcement across the country is looking for.
I have no idea what goes through their mind when they're doing that. I only know what's going through my mind. And I believe, I think I read somewhere where one of the cops, not only did they stop him and his dad together, but when they stopped him by the cop, there was a cop that remembered stopping him alone by the college. And so they then went back and they found that they had stopped the vehicle.
They actually had stopped him in August near the crime scene. So it was a combination of some behavior in terms of where he had been traveling around in that vehicle, the fact that vehicle was captured on surveillance footage in the area, as well as then they went into the cellular evidence and they were able to pull cell records that identified GPS locations where his phone was pinging up to 12 times prior to the murders in the neighborhood of that home. So it's interesting because when you look at this case, obviously there's a DNA component, but there's a cellular evidence component, which back in your day, that wasn't really an option, was it?
No, we did have, there towards the end, before I left the department, we did have cellular data available.
But not in the 80s during the Ramirez case.
No, not in the 80s during Ramirez case.
I've got a question for you, and again, this may be speculative, but I'm just curious to get your thoughts on it. This particular suspect, Bryan Kohberger, was a graduate student studying criminology, working on his PhD. He obviously is an intelligent person based on what people are saying about him, and he knew a lot about crime and criminology and the legal system. Just give me your thought as someone who's been doing this a long time. What would be behind the motivation to commit this kind of a crime and allow himself to be caught on surveillance footage driving the vehicle that he used to, assuming he's the one who did this, commission the crime, when clearly, he went out of his way to sort of avoid capture and for a number of reasons, such an obvious mistake. Can you speak to the psychology behind that? How could he have not known he would be caught on surveillance video?
Just asked me about 6 questions and one question trying to send it all out. Here's what I do know. It is a crime driven, it appears to be a sexually driven crime, sign of a sexual deviant. Now, if you are, let us say, a male by yourself at home, like Richard, the Night Stalker, was in his apartment and he's thinking about what he's going to do. He knows it's not right, but is driven. It is sexually motivating him. It is sexually motivated for him. So he goes out, and you think at the time that you go out, you've thought about everything there is to think about, and nothing is going to stop you. You're going to go ahead and do it. Because he's a PhD, that just says he's above average intelligent level. The mistakes he made, I don't know. People are concerned today. You make it light of it that how could he be so foolish to get around the security cameras. Well, I don't know that any of the security cameras actually showed his face. And people today, if you watch television every day, these people that are going into stores and demolishing jewelry boxes, jewelry cases, and robbing stores 20, 30 people at a time, and are doing home invasion robberies, they're all covered with security cameras, and that doesn't seem to bother them.
So you're suggesting that just because the vehicle is shown in the area around the time of these crimes, where you clearly cannot see his face, or you can't make out who's driving the vehicle, it's not hard evidence necessarily.
I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that going through his mind, he doesn't believe it. If he doesn't believe this, the whole reason for doing it is it appears that it's all very first degree planning beforehand. He's plotting this thing out. So he's going back and forth, and he doesn't think he's going to get caught. And he's worried about showing his face because you never see his face. And because one vehicle is going back and forth, it's the defense is certainly that's going to play a big part of the defense, prove that that's his vehicle. Now you have it by record, by other records, by the fact that it shows the cell phone where he's using it, where he was stopped, where he lived. It's circumstantial. It's strong circumstantial evidence, but it's not something that's going to stop him, because his motivation is to get to the women.
You raise an interesting point. You mentioned circumstantial evidence, and right now, there apparently, I don't know if you had a chance to read, there was a probable cause affidavit issued. Hold on, my phone there was a probable cause affidavit issued, and a lot of it, there's some DNA component to this, but you talk about circumstantial evidence, and to your point, they could have video footage of the guy sitting in his car outside of the home 5 minutes before the murders take place, and that's still not necessarily hard evidence that he actually commissioned the crime himself.
They are all pieces of a puzzle, and in and of themselves, separately, they're not worth much. When you put them all together, then you see the picture coming out in the puzzle. And the DNA is not circumstantial evidence. That's hard physical evidence. It's hard to get around. How is he going to get blood on a knife sheath that was found in the bedroom of the girls the night of the assault? That's hard evidence. So when you add the totality of the circumstantial evidence of where his phone is pinging from, where his car is seen, and when, it all makes for strong circumstantial evidence. You leave that bloody thumbprint out, or any footprints, or any physical evidence they found a location, and it's still circumstantial evidence.
Right, and lots of cases are tried on circumstantial evidence alone and won, right? That's the burden on the prosecutor to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and circumstantial evidence can get them there.
It can. It's difficult. It's difficult, but yes, you can do it. And that the reason for the affidavit, and its probable cause, you're throwing all this circumstantial evidence together and telling a judge, we have this evidence, this evidence, this evidence, and this is why we believe. We're not saying it's definitive. We're saying this is why we believe. Therefore, it's probable cause to believe that this individual, or what we are seeking, is part and parcel of the case. The judge reviews it, and then the judge grants them the permission to go ahead. In this case, it was for an arrest warrant, and as well as a search warrant.
Right, and then you mentioned in our previous conversation, once that arrest is made, they have that 48-hour window to press charges, but they clearly were prepared to do that. 4 counts of murder in the first degree, 1 count of robbery. So they've got their case. So you mentioned the probable cause affidavit and its purpose. Now that the arrests have been made and there's a court docket and things are moving forward, talk to me for a minute about the role the detectives play at this point. And is there a warm handoff to the prosecutor when you go back and look at the cases you were involved in, specifically the Night Stalker case? By the time Richard was arrested and was up in front of a judge and Were you still involved at that point?
You're still very much involved. You have 48 hours to get it to the point of filing, but that's all it is. They've filed the charges against them. You still have to document everything. It's not like a television show where 60 minutes later, everything's well and done. You still have all the paperwork to be done. You have to wait for lab results to come back. There are more witnesses to contact. There's an awful lot of work that is done and continued to be done up until the time that you're ready for trial.
And are you working in partnership with the prosecutor at that point?
Yes.
What's the relationship like between the prosecutor, the prosecuting team, and the investigative team? Is it a kind of a love-hate relationship? Do they work well together, or do they butt heads from time to time?
You butt heads. I don't know how to say this and without hurting anybody's feelings. On a routine, mundane murder that is just a simple murder to us, it's all it is. We present the facts, and once in a while, we get brand new district attorneys just starting out. This will be their first murder case. You butt heads with someone like that because they really don't know what their first one. And they want so much work and they want you to jump through. And somebody's told them that because they're attorneys, we're just their peons and they can, tell us what to do. And when they say jump, we're up in the air saying how high. And that's not the way it works. They need us just as we need them to present the case. Once they get calmed down, it's a lot easier. And they're not only worried, they're not only treating maybe us not so nice, but they're also rough around the edges with witnesses and victims. They're nervous. All they want to do is win. Now, you get a case like the Ramirez case, where you get vertical prosecution. They get a very experienced deputy district attorney. He comes down, and we were hooked up with the DA before we made an arrest, asking for advice, helping us write search warrants, whatever we needed. And you become very close to that individual all the way to the end of trial. You are a team, and that's what it takes to get it done.
Now, are you as a homicide detective or investigator, is your success measured by a conviction in these types of cases?
I don't know that my success is measured by a conviction because we have so many cases over the years. Certainly my expertise or my ability to work and what pushed me was my everyday work, the consistency of investigating ability. What I do, not every murder is going to be solved, but if you give 110%, you give that little extra, and the surviving victims and the family members, they contact the department, and you've satisfied them. If my surviving victim's family, if they are satisfied, then I'm satisfied. It's that simple. If you do things right and you work together, hopefully you'll get a conviction.
Going back to something we talked about a few minutes ago, in the case of Bryan Kohberger and the circumstantial evidence versus the hard DNA evidence, do you recall in the Ramirez case if Richard was convicted on circumstantial evidence, or was there actual tangible evidence presented during those trials or that trial?
We had tangible evidence. We had firearms, ballistics evidence. We had footprint evidence. When I tell you that the shoe he was wearing, there was on January 9th, 1985, 1,356 pair of model 440 Avias arrived in the United States, of which 6 pair ended up in the state of California, with 1 pair ended up in Los Angeles. That's a pretty strong piece of evidence. And we could put him and the footprint together.
Got it. So it was a combination of factors, but clearly there was physical evidence. Now, in the case of this Idaho quadruple homicide, now that the suspect has been arrested, I think a lot of people are left wondering and are very curious and obviously speculating all over the place about motive. What role does motive play in terms of justifying a conviction? How do you seek to build out a motive? And in this case, you had mentioned the sexual element. Perhaps there's an element of that, as well as the fact that this was somebody who was clearly obsessed with criminology and serial murder, and you can only wonder, what his true intentions were for doing this. But talk to me about the motive and the role that motive plays in a case like this.
Sometimes you have motive, sometimes you don't. Motive only helps the case, but a lack of motive does not hurt the case. If you have physical evidence and circumstantial evidence to go along with it, a lack of motive is not going to be a factor. I don't know that we ever established a motive for Richard. And that was 14 murders we filed on him initially. I don't know that you'll establish a motive for them. You'll be able to establish the fact that it was premeditated. You mentioned the word incel to me, and what did I think about incel? I had never heard of the word, so I had to do my own research on it. And incel, by definition, is a community internet group of males that feel that they've been rejected by women, and there is no sexual activity. They're celibate to women, and they go through this rejection, which builds up a dislike or hatred, which means that they reach out, they have to lash out at women, either through hatred, belittle them, or assault. And so I don't know what they're going to do in terms of psychological witness or evidence, but someone may bring that up as a motive in and of itself.
It's interesting, and of course, it's hard not to scratch your head and be curious about. There's apparently some indication that, there was proof, in fact, that this individual, 7 or 8 months ago, had published on Reddit, had asked for volunteer felons to participate in a criminology study where he wanted to get into the mind of a criminal and what criminals' thought process looks like when they're commissioning a crime. So there's also that academic question or curiosity. Was he actually trying to live this thing out and kind of test the bounds of what's possible and experience it for himself? So who knows, right? It could be a combination.
Early on in the Night Stalker case, when I had established my own profile, if you will, I told people at a meeting, to include one FBI agent, that I was looking for a male that had been rejected by women in his youth. And that came to fruition in the end. And I wasn't working on my PhD. I wasn't working on anything.
Now, from the time that these murders occurred to the arrest, the murders occurred November 13th. The arrest took place December 30th. There was so much negativity being directed at law enforcement, and we talked about this in our previous conversation. What do you think of that turnaround? What does that say about the effort that of law enforcement to be able to, essentially solve? Again, they haven't proven the case yet in court, but to essentially solve this, horrific crime that had a city on the edge of its seat, right, with fear in such a short window of time. What does that say about their effort?
I don't know that it says anything about their effort. They weren't doing it to calm down the city. They were doing it to apprehend a dangerous man, which means that you burn the candle at both ends. They were working hard. And there was no doubt in my mind, as long as they had enough evidence from that crime scene or a little bit of help with the state and the FBI assisting the agency there in Moscow, there was no doubt in my mind. I think I said that when I talked to you. They will apprehend him. And it's just a matter of getting all your ducks together before you make that arrest, because once the arrest is made, once again, the wheels of justice are turning and you're running on a time schedule.
Would you say that the to be able to identify and get him apprehended within a 6-week period, is that impressive, would you say?
You can't say it's impressive. It could have been miserable if they had all the information day one and didn't do anything with it. It depends on what kind of information they have. They have to work their case. They put it together. I'm sure they did it in a timely fashion. They did it as soon as possible. in order to end up with a successful prosecution. The difference being, which with most people is kind of like patrol cops and with the citizens out there, most people are arrest oriented. All they want is they want them arrested for the safety of arrest them, arrest them, arrest them. Patrol cops arrest people, and homicide cops are not arrest oriented. They are prosecution oriented. I know who did it, but I don't want to take him down till I got enough to prosecute him with. Because if you arrest him and you don't have enough to prosecute, well, then 3 days later he's back out on the streets, and then it really creates more problems.
Last thing I want to ask you about today, I think this is an important question. It's something I think about a lot. You know, over the last couple of weeks, you can't open up a website or turn on the TV or open up the newspaper without hearing this guy's name, seeing his face. I mean, instant celebrity. And my concern, and I want to get your take on it, is that the next 5, 10, 50, 1,000 Bryan Kohbergers see that and recognize, hey, you know, I'm somebody that isn't getting the attention I feel I deserve in the world. People don't give me what's rightfully mine. Here's an opportunity for me to have my voice heard and to get all that glory I'm after. You know, are you concerned about the way that we treat individuals like him in this case and sort of almost glamorize them as celebrities and what that might do?
I see both sides of the fence. Number one, the news media is the one responsible for that. They put out anything they can, and they're putting it out. Why? Because people want to know. People watch this stuff, and it's important to them. Somebody, just so the public understands, I know very little about the case, nor do I watch it. I don't care about it. But yet, members of my family can't get enough of it. They watch all this that's going on. So if it sells, the news media is going to put it out there. How do we stop the news media? You don't. They have an obligation to make the public aware of the danger that's out there. You can't. And it's been going on forever. Richard had a following of people. He had groupies in there. A tremendous everything from devil worshippers to attorneys were going there looking at him, and females were. I remember being in there one day where two gorgeous female attorneys were in there. One of them blew her. She was sitting on an aisle, and when he went walking by, he looked and smiled. She blew him a kiss and spread her legs. And I remember joking with my partner. I said, wow, why don't you hook me up, see if it works for me? Because it was that simple. I don't know that we're ever going to stop it. I don't know why they do the things they do, nor I have no idea why women are attracted to men like this. It's an age-old question.
And as far as the next Bryan Kohberger being inspired by what he's done and, you know, trying to, you know, outdo him, there's really no way to stop that, right? Because that information is going to get out. His face is going to be out there. The public just wants to know it. So the downside of that is that you get that into the hands of the wrong people. They have the wrong intentions, but there's really no way to stop it.
You look at people today, you know, people say that we're Roy Rogers, you know, Gene Autry, the Lone Ranger, combat, a lot of guns, a lot of shooting. And that's what tainted the minds of kids growing up. I don't know that that's true. That's what some psychologists say. So I don't know that all this is tainting the mind of a potential future killer. That future killer, I think, has psychological problems before any of this happened anyway. So he just, once he gets it, and if he's got an ego, as Ramirez said, I've got an ego that will fill this room. And he could tell you anything about serial killers from the time the Romans fed the Christians to the lions to modern day serial killers. So he had an ego. They all have egos. And if they want to be the best, then they just have to do more.
Yeah, it's just a shame that somebody that craves attention and craves visibility can just pick up a weapon and inflict harm on another human and then become an instant celebrity. You know, this guy's name has been everywhere. And a month ago, no one even knew who he was. And it's just interesting to think about how easy it is to get that kind of fame through such horrific means.
I don't know that he was looking for fame when he did this. I don't know that he was looking for any of that. Matter of fact, it's an irrational act followed by acts of rationality. He did it. Now he doesn't want to be discovered. So now he's got to figure out how to stay out of the limelight. It wasn't until he got caught. And most killers like that don't anticipate being caught.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you see, his dad flies out from Pennsylvania to drive back with him across the country in that white Elantra when his intention was probably to be back in school a few weeks later after the Christmas break. So you can only imagine that, again, as they build their circumstantial case, they say, well, clearly he's getting rid of the car, he's getting rid of evidence. So to your point, yeah, I mean, perhaps he didn't want to be caught. Perhaps, this was something he intended to continue doing, and all of this is coming as a big surprise to him.
I have no idea. Let somebody else much smarter than I figure it out eventually.
Well, you don't give yourself enough credit, but we enjoy having you and speaking with you, and it's always great to get your perspective. And I know, tell me for a quick minute, I know you're part of a podcast with George Lopez. Can you just tell me a minute about that?
For a fact, as soon as I'm done here, I'm locking up the house and going to do a podcast with George Lopez right now. We do one a week. He's a true crime enthusiast. He saw the documentary on the Night Stalker, which Netflix put out, the 4-part documentary. He enjoyed it so much. A friend of mine called me up and said, I just heard George Lopez on the radio saying, anybody know Gil Carrillo? Give him my number. I'd like to talk to him. I did. That led to an invitation to go drink a beer with him. That beer was done on a podcast. I had no idea it was going to be a podcast. And that was episode number 11. We just dropped number 92 the other day, and I've been on all but 3 of them since then. He now refers to me as his co-host when he's nice. Refers to me as a lot of other things. It's a fun show to do. There is no particular subject matter. Obviously, with George, he's actor, comedian, and it's a fun show to do. It's called George Lopez. Oh my God, hi. That's OMGHI.
And then I'm sure on that podcast we get to see multiple sides of your personality. It's not just you talking about crime.
Oh no, I talk very little about crime. It's all about having fun and laughter, and it's a different side of Gil Carrillo. The people are just not prepared. Just a different side. It's a lot of fun, and he's a good man. It's a good show, and he's such a busy guy. He's got Lopez versus Lopez now on Friday nights, primetime, NBC, Channel 4. He's a busy man, he's a lot of fun.
All right, so everybody go check out that podcast. Gil, thank you again for your time. Always a pleasure.
You're very welcome. Have a good day.
All right, take care. Bye.